brief housekeeping. Thank you everybody for sending in your exam schedules. I'm still waiting for one person, so as soon as I get that person's schedule we can finalize that. Hopefully, I'm hoping next time. Also, just a reminder, assignment 1 is due on Thursday. Thanks to those of you who have already submitted. Okay, everybody have a handout? Left it here. If you could pass it on down to the other side, that would be great. So we'll be talking about state statutes today, and mostly it will be a review of what we already talked about, because pretty much the pattern that we saw and the features that we saw with federal statutes and with our friend the federal annotated code will be true on the state end. However, what we will do today with the handout and then later with the workshop is to take a look at print. Again, I know everybody much prefers going online, and I can certainly understand that, but also, again, I'm not entirely sure whether or not you will always be able to go online. Wherever you wind up, it may be that wherever you are has the state statutes in print and want you to at least start that way. So I still feel obliged to make sure that you have those skills. So we'll be, as I said, we'll be doing a print workshop after we go through the material. Okay, so we've talked a lot about HMO liability and ERISA with regard to the federal statutes, but of course we ultimately, if we can, want to sue in state court. Of course we may be preempted. We haven't quite answered that question yet. So we want to see what is the law in New York with regard to HMO liability. And we don't know much more than what we know about what we know in the federal end. So where would be a good place to start? I give you little
secondary sources.
Okay, excellent. Definitely secondary sources. We don't have the act name, we don't have any sort of citation, no cases, nothing. Any particular one come to mind for New York?
New York jurisprudence.
New York juror. Typically with a New York question, when I really don't know anything, that's where I'll start. And I've gone to Westlaw. Obviously the print is okay. Can also search New York juror on Lexis, but because it's a West publication, it actually is slightly more up to date, I believe, on Westlaw. So again, standard way to pull up any title on Westlaw, just type it in and eventually it will guess. And I can do this ahead of time, or I can do my search and then do the post-search filters. Totally up to you. Personally, when I know I just want to search New York jurisprudence, I don't want to deal with all those other results, so I go here. But if you like it the other way, do it the other way, that's fine. Okay, so I'm just going to, now I can browse through the table of contents. You all know I'm a big fan of table of contents, but I'm not exactly sure where it's going to be, so at least I'm going to start just with a very basic search, HMO liability. And Westlaw is very smart. It knows that HMO means health maintenance organizations. And so I don't know if any of you remember way back when we talked about secondary, those of you who, it's actually our second class, those of you who dove into New York juror actually wound up finding this section eventually. It's a little tough because the index is a little tough. So let's take a quick look. So I always like to see where I am, so I'm in the malpractice topic. Okay, that could be relevant to our question. And of course, we're talking about health maintenance organization, which of course we know is of interest. And so the provision of comprehensive self-services directly or indirectly by an HMO through its health service plan is not considered the practice of the profession of medicine by that organization or plan. So that could be bad for us. However, each member or agent of the organization may be fully and personally liable and accountable for any negligent or wrongful act or misconduct committed by him or her or any person under his direct supervision and control while rendering professional services on behalf of the organization or plan. So that's a possible theory. Could be held liable for negligence. So that's going back to what we were talking about, looking into how these decisions get made. We might need more facts from our client on what the information she got and how the information was made to figure out if we even have a hope of bringing up negligence. But one of the great things, in addition, one of the great things with regard to secondary sources, of course, are the footnotes, which Westlaw pops up, or we can just scroll down. And so here we get a reference right into the statutes that might address what we're interested in. And this looks just like the federal statutes. So we have all of our wonderful annotated code features. So if I want to see cases that interpret this, I'm going to go to Notes of Decisions. If I want to see what session laws enacted and possibly amended, I'm going to scroll down to the credits. And I might want to take a look at context and analysis to see what other secondary sources might help explain this section to me. Okay, so that's online. Let's take a look at the print. And so turn the page. We, of course, have our McKinney's, what I call the black volumes for obvious reasons, because it doesn't say McKinney's anywhere on the spine if you do wind up having to use the print. I'll pass this around in a little while. I know you've already met McKinney's black volumes, but you can see it again. And again, this is just a quick review, even though we haven't talked formally about state statutes because, well, it pretty much works the same as federal. So on page 2, we see the beginning, just as we see here online. Notice up top, I have a handy-dandy arrow on the right. It's pointing to Article 44. Anybody guess why I think that's important? And it's not an obvious question, so if you want to remember, one of the great features about an annotated code is the table of contents. You know, I go on and on about the table of contents, and it's true of the annotated code too. Okay, so we discovered section 410 is interesting, but what if 409 is interesting, or 408, or 420? That doesn't have to necessarily be contiguous. Article 44 tells me where I need to flip back in the book in order to find that wonderful table of contents. Yes, it's a pain in the neck in the book. I'm going to grant you that, because here on Westlaw, all you have to do is click on table of contents. But that's how you would do it should you need to in the print. And again, it worked the same in the federal, where we saw it was either called chapter. Different states are going to have different names for it, articles, chapters, subsections, so you have to be a little flexible. But that's why Article 44 could be useful, or knowing that it's Article 44 could be useful. And just a little terminology here. Of course, we know we're interested in Section 410. The name of the Section 410 is Health Maintenance Organizations, Professional Services. And that's more how I refer to it. So when I start talking about the name of the section, you know that's what I mean. It's just the words next to the section number. Okay, turn to page 3, if you would. And again, this is review. And again, you find a handy-dandy arrow, this time on the left-hand side. And that is pointing to what Westlaw calls the credits, what Lexis calls the history, what in print the only name I can come up with is the parenthetical after the section, which I know isn't very catchy, but it is a parenthetical after the section. So let's just remind ourselves what this is telling us. So what is it telling us?
The year that statute was first enacted and all the following amendments.
Okay, so this particular section was first enacted what year?
1976.
By, what do we think C stands for?
Congress.
What's the, okay. Let's go to the source, as it were. So we're talking about New York. So the law that enacted would be called what generically?
Chapter law?
That's the answer for New York. What's it called generically in any state and federal? Like, there's soda and then there's Coke. Soda is the generic term, Coke is the brand name.
Public law?
Okay, public law is what the feds call it? Session law. Okay, so generically session law, again the feds call it public law. In New York we call it chapter law. And they can't even manage to give us a CH to really clue us in. Talk about being stingy with the letters here. So abbreviated C for chapter.
938, section 1.
Okay, and somebody else, can you tell me the date and the chapter number of the last amendment?
1996, chapter 704.
Not that I gave you a hint or anything with the underlining, but well done nonetheless, because it's not intuitive. Everybody else see where that's coming from? The year and it's the last one because it's the most recent because it's the last one in the list, at least the last one listed here. And I'll leave that as a hint for later on. Okay, we'll be talking about some of these other features, historical and statutory notes when we talk about legislative history, and then we move on to what Westlaw calls the context and analysis, basically the secondary sources that help explain this particular section. So we get some law reviews, we get some more encyclopedias, a reference to the old section for New Yorker I pointed to, and then we get those wonderful, and I'm on page 4, sorry, notes of decisions. Remember, those are the cases that interpret our section. So they talk about it some and what it means. And they not only does our wonderful friend, the annotated code, list these for us, but it actually tells us what different topics these cases talk about. So if we're interested in causes of action, we would go to topic number 1. If we're interested in defenses, we would go to topic number 5. And turning the page, you'll see defenses. And a particular case that talked about this section with regard to defenses. So are we finished? We've looked at 410 in the print and we're done?
No,
Wonderful, why?
I don't know.
Okay, your intuition's good though. Because we have to update. And I'm going to be very silly about it in hopes that you remember. Remember the good old pocket part. Yeah, I'm afraid in print that's what you have to do. So, taking a look at pages 6, we see the pocket part, and we see that it's current through the laws of 2014. So, pretty much to the end of the legislative session, so through the end of 2014, which isn't bad since we're now in the middle of February. And we can see on page 7, again, you probably have done this a bunch of times, but when you're looking at an update and you don't see any text for the sections and you just see research references or notes of decisions, that means that the section is actually up to date in the main volume. If you see a B or a C, what they do is they'll only put the part of the section that got updated and they'll refer you back to the main volume for whatever is still current. And again, we see New Yorker. We see some updated research references. Okay, and then if you turn to page 8, you will see an example. Well, you won't see an example. You'll see the page where the table of contents for Article 44 was. Even though this particular page in our handout is after the section, it actually appears before. So 4410 is, actually that's 46. Let's go to 4410 is here. And if I want to go to where Article 44 is, I would flip back. And basically, I would just look on top. Oh, it still says Article 44, still says Article 44, still says Article 44. And here, actually in the beginning of the book, it isn't always in the beginning of the book, it just happens to be coincidentally for this particular article, there's Article 44, which is the page that you are looking at on page 8 of the handout. So that's essentially how the books work. In the handout, I gave you a couple of other examples. Again, if you find yourself doing battle with the books, which you will be doing for our workshop anyway, if not in the future. Index. It may be that you don't get a wonderful reference from New Yorker or another secondary source, and maybe you aren't going to be able to search Lexis or Westlaw. Yes, Google is still an alternative, but because statutes, I talked to you about the controlled vocabulary, the fact that statutes use very specific language. The great example is, of course, ERISA preemption. The word preemption doesn't appear in the section that is the ERISA preemption section. They call it other laws or supersedure, which I can't even remember how to spell. Remember to search for it. So it may be that an index is useful. I pointed out the index, if you do have access to Westlaw, there's that table of contents. You can get to this print index, or you can just look at the print index. This is actually an example where if you do want to look at an index, I actually think the print format is easier to use than the online. I'm not a big fan of online, but if you're home at 2 a.m. and don't want to come to the library, basically, there are any number of ways of getting to this. I go to the particular state, statutes, and then you'll see a list here on the side, one of the various different statutory resources, one of which is the index. So here's the general index. The other interesting thing to know about print indexes for statutes is that, remember our friend the popular name table? What did we use the popular name table for? What's the name suggest? Popular name?
Find the section in the U.S. Code that corresponds with the popular name of the statute.
So the equivalent in New York State statutes, McKinney's, would be?
Public law?
Well, fine. It's I'm making the question more complex than it needs to be. Finding the New York statute by popular name. So if you have, I don't know, the Uniform Commercial Code, we've all heard of that. If you want to find New York's version of the UCC, you could scan the titles and guess, or you could just go to the popular name table. You can see it's right here online. Yes, you can look up New York UCC and you'd probably find it doing a web search, or you can go to the last volume of the index. So this index is T through Z, so that's what I mean by last volume, the end of the alphabet. And then after the letter Z, you'll find the New York popular name table. So later on when we do our workshop, I will be asking you to look in the popular name table for your particular state. And that is where you will find it, in the after Z in the index, essentially. Sometimes it's its own volume, but most of the time it's after the Z. For instance, in the USCA, if you ever had to use the print, you'd find a whole separate volume called popular name table. You wouldn't have to locate the Z volume of the index. Okay, so that's what page 9 is all about. Pages 10 and 11. Because we didn't go through the index in print, actually, let's see if this works. I haven't tried this yet, so I'm not quite sure what we'll get. But let's go. See if we can find an entry, health maintenance organization. So I'm online on Westlaw Index, so this would be the same as turning to the H volume in print. And all I'm trying to get to is any reference to, under health maintenance organization, there's New York Pub Health 4406E. Anybody know what NY Pub Health means? Public health law. So that one's kind of easy to guess, but you might get one. I've seen that referred to as PUBHE, so pub he. And it's like, what on earth does that mean? So when you're in a print, I mean, here on Westlaw it doesn't matter because it gives you the link, so you don't have to guess. But if you're in print and you get a reference to pub/he or some other crazy abbreviation, just about any book, not just statutory, not just indexes, just any book that uses indexes, if it's worth its salt, will have a table of abbreviations either in the beginning or the end. So that's true of the McKinney's index and true of most, it should be all statutory indexes if they're using abbreviations, and that's what you see on page 10. So this is just a reminder, if you see a funky abbreviation, because states that use names for their titles, remember titles are the subject areas of the code. So New York is one, California is another. There are lots of states that just use numbers. So for instance, Connecticut uses a number dash number. So that's kind of easier because you don't have to guess abbreviations. But if a state does use a named title the way we do in New York, you can see the abbreviations here. And again, that would be in the beginning of the index volumes to let you know what on earth pub/he and all these other Gen O and Lock Fin and all sorts of funky abbreviations, what they mean. So those are pages 10 and 11. Any questions so far? I'm kind of zooming on through here, since on the theory that we went through this with federal, and this is pretty much the same. Okay, and just a reminder, because again, this is pretty important. Just so you can see what those session laws, remember that's the generic name for, we just talked about it, session law is a generic name for what in New York? Chapter laws, excellent. So our chapter laws in McKinney's. And again, now I will pass along McKinney's and McKinney's. So McKinney's black volume, as I refer to it, and then McKinney's session laws as the spine refers to it. So again, you just reinforce the difference. So again, remember McKinney's black volume, the code as the law exists today, McKinney's session laws as they were passed as chapter laws throughout the years. And you see what you would see inside the books on pages, inside the McKinney session laws. We've already looked at the black volumes. On pages 12 is just the title page for 1996. And then we had identified chapter 705 as the most recent amendment, and you see that on page 13, and this is what a session law looks like. So the law gets passed, and it's an act to amend the public health law, and section 1 tells us section 4408 of public health law is repealed and a new section added, and you see it below. And then on page 14, we jump ahead to section 5 of our chapter law. And section 5 tells us that section 4410, again, remember the section numbers of the session laws. We looked at the public law for federal. We're now looking at the chapter law for New York. The section number for the chapter law is going to be totally different than as it appears in the code. And we see a great example of that on page 14, that section 5 tells us that section 4410 in the code, in the public health law, is amended by adding a new subdivision to read as follows. And take a look back on page 3. And what we identified as the most recent amending chapter law back in 1996, chapter 705. Notice it says section 5. Looking back at 14, section 5, we can now read for ourselves, is the section that amends 4410. Everybody see the correspondence? So that parenthetical actually gives us pretty detailed information, even though it crams a lot in and can't even give us an H for our chapter abbreviation. But it does much better. It gives us the section. So if we had a session law that was like 100 sections, which, you know, the laws can get pretty long, it would be really nice to know which section of the chapter law was the one that amended our code section. And that parenthetical, and again online, the credits and history would tell us that. Okay, any questions? In fact, I'll go back just to show you. Yeah, I could have done this faster. There we go. So again, down here in the credits, that's the parenthetical, and again, we see that it's Section 5 of Chapter 705, 1996. Okay. So one thing we haven't talked about yet is citators. You all have heard about shepherds, right? Keysight also? You all know about Keysight? Same thing, different companies, Keysight, Westlaw, Shepherds, Lexis. How many of you knew that you could shepherdize or Keysight statutes? Okay, a few people, good. So we'll go over that briefly. I'm going to start actually with Lexis, and you'll see why in a moment. Because Shepherds, of course, is on Lexis, and Lexis has a feature that's for Shepherds, that's actually kind of nice. So the first thing we haven't sort of talked about much is kind of mechanical. It's just if you already know a statute section, how do you pull it up? Pretty much on Lexis and Bloomberg, you kind of just have to guess the abbreviation. I mean, we all know U.S. code, so that's easy. 42 USC or USCA or USCS, whatever, or 29 is the one we've been using. 29 USCA 1144. 42 USCA 1983. Whatever your section is, USCA, we all know. USCS, we all know the abbreviation. And by the way, USCA is on Westlaw and USCS is on Lexis, but both of them recognize the other, as well as just plain USC. The only one that's picky about USC is Bloomberg. You have to use USC. But for states, because as we were talking about, the abbreviations, especially when you have code names like public health, the abbreviations can be all over the map. It could be PubHe, it could be Pub Health, it just has spelled out public health. So you kind of have to just guess. So the best way of guessing I've found is typing out the full code title name, code title name. So public health in our case, not PubHe, not Pub Health. And the state abbreviation beforehand, so Lexis knows what state we're interested in. I mean, you have to give it some hint. And then, of course, the section we're interested in. And I'm going to go with a different section, 4406, just because it gives us a better example for what I'd like to show you. So when I guess this way, Lexis does a search. However, I already know that I am looking for statutes, so I have to tell Lexis, yeah, go to the statutes portion of your results. And sure enough, Lexis, once you tell it go to statutes, Lexis does a pretty good job of figuring out, oh yeah, that's what you want. And notice it's CLS. Actually, that reminds me, I haven't shown you yet CLS in print. As I mentioned, Lexis and Westlaw compete, so we have USCA Westlaw, USCS Lexis on the federal end. On the state end, at least for New York, there are two codes. There's McKinney's, which we've been talking about, Black McKinney's versus Session Law McKinney's. There's also CLS, which stands for Consolidated Law Service, and that is the Lexis publication. And if you look at the top of this, you'll see it doesn't get used much. It's kind of dusty. But you'll see it's the same. It's an annotated code, so same concept. The only there'll be two main differences. The text of the statutes will be the same. The main difference will be the research assistance. So the case notes, notes of decisions, as well as, of course, the research references, because Westlaw will refer to West publications, and Lexis will refer to Lexis publications. So since we are on Lexis, Lexis refers us to CLS, Pub Health 4406. So it figured out the section that we wanted. And again, here is 4406, the table of contents laid out a little bit differently, up here up top. Remember too, and I'll remind you again on Westlaw, always good to just be aware of how up to date it is online. So Lexis here is telling us current through chapters 1 through 478, again our chapter laws, through 2014. And here's typically, if there is a very new chapter, that Lexis and Westlaw and Bloomberg, the great thing about doing the online research is you don't have to worry about updating. and worrying about the pocket part, and actually the CLS, there's a softbound supplement because the pocket part got too fat. You don't have to worry about all that. Lexis, Westlaw, Bloomberg will incorporate it. However, there will be a time, there could be a time period where a chapter law gets passed, and we're talking about 50 states plus federal. It may take Lexis, Westlaw, Bloomberg a few days to incorporate. My sense is probably less so for New York than, say, for Montana. No offense to anybody who likes Montana. It's just that New York is just a bigger legal market for Lexis, Westlaw, and Bloomberg. So it's just good old commerce. So it may take a few days, but what you usually will see is some indication, like a flag saying some form of update flag. So just look at that, take a look at this current through, look for the flag, and you can also try shepherdizing, but actually I find the flag more reliable because, as we'll see, there's a lot in shepherds and it's easy to miss something that might change. So obviously to shepherdize, you click on shepherdize this document. Shepherd gives us its signal about what might have happened, and if you do it right and point to the signal, it will tell you what it stands for, and I'm not doing it right. So we'll go there and I'll try again on this page. There we go, citation information available. So nothing much is happening with any of these citations, it's just there's citation information available. You'd see a yellow triangle or a red stop sign or something more dramatic if something more dramatic was happening. You see these two entries. I don't know why Lexis does that. Probably you just want to look at them both. This one, since it's got 23, pretty much duplicates what's here. Again, I don't know why they separate them out. So let's look at the 23. And what's interesting about Lexis Shepherds for statutes on Lexis is it gives you subsection reports. Notice it gives you pending legislation. Pending legislation doesn't mean that there's been an update. It just means there's something pending in the legislature. It may go nowhere. Bill may get introduced and then nothing ever happens to it. But if this is an area that you practice in a lot, or that you know you're going to have this client for years and years because this is a long-term project, it might be worth checking out just so you're aware of what's going on and what to watch out for. But as I mentioned, what's interesting about Shepherds is, for statutes, is that it gives you these subsection reports. So here it's just listing all these cases that cite to 4406. If we go to the subsection reports, it gives us cases that cite to particular subsections of our section. So 4406, if I'm interested in A3, I can now look at cases that cite to. I don't know how much they talk about it, and that's an important distinction, but cite to A3. Now, there are only 23 here, so I can scan through everything, but imagine like our USCA section 1144, there are literally hundreds of cases that cite to 1144. If I'm really only interested in subsection D of 1144, and I really couldn't care less about cases interpreting A through C and E through F, whatever, I would love this, and that can happen, again, when you're dealing with complex legislation like ERISA and preemption. So this can be really useful. So this, in my mind, is a big plus mark for Lexis. So if I were evaluating Shepherds versus Keysight for statutes, I would mention that this is a good feature. So scrolling down, you can see the various subsections. So that's Shepherds on Lexis. I'm now going to move over to Bloomberg, and then we'll come back to Keysight. Again, on Bloomberg, to pull up a statutory section, you can either navigate through state law, New York legislative, or you can guess. So let's see how Bloomberg does when you guess. Public health. 4406. I was debating whether to put in the word law there. Probably would have helped, but let's see what happens with 4406. Oh, no, Bloomberg did a good job. Okay, a couple things to notice about Statutes on Bloomberg, as I mentioned, Bloomberg to me is still behind the competitive, or without the competitive edge when it comes to annotated codes. They just haven't had the time that Lexis and Westlaw has, because Lexis bought CLS, which already exists, and Westlaw bought McKinney's, which already exist, and likewise USCA and USCS have been their publications. And there's no existing equivalent for Bloomberg to have purchased, so they have to pretty much develop it on their own. So they're a little bit behind. So that means we have some case analysis. So instead of notes of decisions or case notes, it's called case analysis. Still very nice. Get those cases that interpret our section. Slowly. But we don't have a citator for statutes quite yet. What's the difference? Because I was chatting with this, I think, Catherine, you and I were chatting about this last time. Notice that we looked at Shepard's, and there were cases that cited to our section 4406. There are also notes of decisions. The notes of decisions tend to discuss the section and interpret the section more in depth than the citing references. Remember, you could cite to a section. It could just be a judge could cite to a section, and it'll just be a singular reference. Oh yes, and 4406 isn't relevant. And it would come up in citing references because it was cited. So in terms of finding cases that interpret your section, I would definitely go first to the notes of decision, case notes on Lexis, and case analysis on Bloomberg. They're all the same thing, they're just called slightly different things. The other thing I noticed about Bloomberg, which kind of surprised me, is our parenthetical at the end. It only gives us the most recent one. It doesn't give us the original one or any intervening amendments. No idea why, but that could be a problem if you're doing legislative history research, which you'll understand better in a couple of weeks. Okay, so no citator on Bloomberg. Back here on Westlaw. Basically, I'll stick with 4410 since we're here. I think pretty straightforward. We have the citing references are here. And then one nice thing that Westlaw does is it gives us citing references not just to cases, but to any secondary sources that might be there. So again, if we wanted additional mentions of our section in secondary sources to follow up on to help explain, that would be a good resource to use. But taking a look at the cases, Westlaw does not divide it up by subsection. You can scroll through and see the highlighted to see if there are any subsections. So here's an example for 4410 subsection 2. That isn't too difficult when they're well, actually they're 84 citing. How many cases do we have? I think there are not that many cases. There are only 18 cases, so that 18 cases not too bad to scroll through. But if there really were 84 cases, I wouldn't want to have to scroll through everything. I'd want to see just my subsection if that's what I was interested in narrowing it to. Now you may not. We may be interested in all of 4410, in which case we want to check out and see if any of these cases discuss our area. And notice too here on Westlaw, we can search within these results, which is very nice. And we'll talk more about advanced, we can search within the results here on Lexis too, but it's before we choose a particular. And we'll talk more about Shepard's as well as KeyCite and some of the advanced features when we talk about citators for cases, because that's where many of the advanced features come in that we don't really have with statutes, but we do have the search within results. Any question about Shepard's KeyCite? Okay. Couple of items. Since we're here on Lexis, I'm going to go back. Back when the Earth was still cooling and I was a first-year associate, I got assigned one of these research projects, and I mean it was a legitimate project for a client. I had to find the 50 states regulations on underground storage tanks. And now, mind you, the Earth was cooling a long time ago, and I still remember this, is how traumatic it was. If I had only known that this resource exists, now way back then it was definitely print, there was no online, but it existed in print, and now, much to your benefit, it's online. There are resources called 50-state surveys for both statutes and regulations. We haven't talked about regulations yet, but the concept is the same. And actually Lexis, in my opinion, has probably the best selection. And what a 50-state survey is, and you notice I'm just typing in 50-state surveys, and on Lexis I'm going to go to the table of contents so we see the list. And we'll go to our friend healthcare law. You obviously look through the topics. And let's go to managed healthcare. Now, there's no guarantee there's going to be something of interest, so notice home health care isn't really our topic, but I'm going to go there anyway just so you can see what a 50-state survey does, and as the name suggests, it lets you know what's going on in the different states, what states have statutes or possibly regulations, depending on the survey you're looking at, or in this case, Lexis just does both, what the state does for that particular area of law. So like I said, I had to look at I had to go to a law school law library and go to the state section and look through 50 different sets of indexes and 50 different sets of regulations, and it took me days. And here it all is. For this particular subject, if I had found it on my subject. No guarantee. As you can see, the subjects are fairly limited, and we went to our subject of interest, and home health care isn't our issue. I might have also tried health litigation, so you need to be a little flexible. So that's Lexis. This also exists on Westlaw, not yet on Bloomberg. So again, 50 state, notice I have 50 state surveys comes right up. So that's all you have to remember. The magic words like Westlaw separates them out, statutory, regulatory, or you can go by topic. So notice there's health law. And I'm just going to, again, choose one. It's going to be pretty much the same. And you can see references. Last but not least, we haven't talked a great deal about the other libraries in Hein Online. We talked somewhat about the Law Journal Library, but on Hein Online, and again I get there, I'm here at the Law Library homepage. My favorite way is topic list. You can also type it in there if you like. And Hein Online is here on the left. Oh, right, I have to log in down here. Let's hope it works. So my 700 number. Hey, it worked. And so that's exactly how it would work for you all. We talked about the Law Journal Library. Scrolling down, and also another little bit of a trick on Hein Online. This one's called Subject Compilation of State Laws. Actually, this was the original print version that, back while the Earth was still cooling, I would have looked at if I had known about in print. But now it's on Hein Online, and I just click on Database, and then you can do a keyword search. A little bit different. What will come up are law review articles, books, different resources that Hein may or may not link to. So it's actually not quite as good, I think, as Lexis or Westlaw. But articles that might have a footnote that lists all the states' statutes on whatever the topic is. Likewise, books that might list all of the state statutes. But if you do have Hein Online and have this available, it's worth a check if you wind up in the position I was in, having to find all 50 states of fill-in-the-blank law. Okay, the only thing I'm going to mention, and then we will go for our workshop. I mentioned the Uniform Commercial Code earlier. Basically, this Uniform Law Commission is a group of legislatures and experts in various fields that come up with proposed statutes for states to adopt to make it uniform across the country. Obviously, the UCC, I gave the example the other day, we all want to be able to write a check in New York and have it be able to be cashed by somebody in New Jersey, and obviously maybe even more important, vice versa, they write in New Jersey and we can cash it in New York. So the Uniform Commercial Code is the best example I can think of this adoption by states of a uniform law proposed by the Uniform Law Commission. What happens is the states adopt these laws, not necessarily verbatim. They may change it to fit the particular state's policies or legislatures. There are a whole lot of these uniform laws out there, and there are a whole lot that some or many states have adopted. And it is now available. This is freely available on the web, the Uniform Law Commission. You can actually also just Google if you are interested in the Uniform Probate Code. A lot of the ACTEC journal students I work with are interested in the Uniform Probate Code semester or two ago, and this was one way to find it. Another way to find these, and it also the nice thing is it gives you the states that have enacted them and links to that state's legislative website in order to find that enacted. So, so you could search. Let's do this quickly. I really do want to get out to the so actually let's just do the actually I think I have to just type in probate code. In print, if you care, these uniform laws appear in this set called Uniform Laws Annotated. This is just one of many, many volumes of that. But since we're into show and tell today, I brought that. Okay, this isn't coming up. I wouldn't worry about it too much. Here's completed acts. Basically, if you're looking for the Uniform Probate Code, either Google it or come to the Uniform Laws Commission website. This link is on our class web links. And you can see the different acts here, and when you go to the acts, you can actually see which states have adopted it, and links to that state's statutes that are available on the web. Any questions? Okay, as I mentioned, we're going to go use we print statutes in the library, and I'm just going to ask you to pass down a few copies here. There you go. And we're going to go the shortcut through the side door here since I can get in here. So just come around to the right. And if you would all team up, since we only have 4 states, so how's that going to work? 1, 2, 3. I'm not very good at math today. 5, 8. Oh, perfect. So we have 8 people and 4 states. That divides, so two a team. So actually, to save time, because I'm a little bit behind, I'm just going to assign people. I'll let you team up next time. We'll just do it by seat. So Dave and Catherine, could you take California? Adam and Justin, can you take Florida? Dan and Royce, can you take New Jersey? And Eugene and Helena, would you take Texas? And I'll show you where that is. And these are just some simple questions, I hope simple questions we just went over. And it just, again, give you a chance to get your hands on the states. I need my ID so we can get in the library. And you can leave your stuff here or bring it with you and then head out. We'll have, if we want to go out the shortcut, we'll have to head out as a group. But that's okay. we'll finish up the federal statutes workshop, so bring those sheets with you. I'll bring extra copies in case you've lost it, but then you'll have to start over, so see if you can find yours. And then we will finish up with statutes, and then as well as do a little review, and then I will hand out assignment number 2, and I will be collecting assignment number 1 before all the fun begins. So that's it.